June 15, 1944. Dawn breaks over the western Pacific as the largest armada yet assembled in the Pacific theater surrounds the island of Saipan. 800 vessels, battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, transport ships, and landing craft form a steel ring around the 15-mile-long island. Aboard the transports, 71,000 Marines and Army soldiers prepare for what will become one of the bloodiest battles in Pacific War history. At 5:42 hours, the pre-invasion bombardment begins. 14 battleships and 11 cruisers unleash a thunderous barrage. Shells weighing up to 2,700 pounds arc through the morning sky, crashing into Japanese positions with earth-shaking force. Carrier aircraft swoop low, strafing beaches and inland targets. The island disappears beneath clouds of smoke and dust as thousands of tons of high explosive reshape the terrain. But beneath the devastation, 31,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors wait in an elaborate network of caves, bunkers, and fortified positions. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding the defense, has prepared his forces for a fight to the death. Unlike earlier Pacific battles where defenders concentrated at the beaches, Saito has positioned his troops in depth, ready to contest every yard of the island. He knows what American commanders know: Saipan is different. This island, 1,500 miles from Tokyo, lies within bomber range of the Japanese home islands. Its capture will bring American B-29 superfortresses within striking distance of Japan itself. As the first waves of landing craft surge toward the beaches, no one, not the anxious Marines crowded in the boats, not the Navy gunners still pounding the shore, not the Japanese defenders waiting in their caves, can imagine the full horror that will unfold over the next 24 days. The Battle of Saipan will claim over 55,000 casualties, destroy a Japanese fleet, topple a government in Tokyo, and open the final chapter of the Pacific War. Saipan occupies a unique place in the geography of the Pacific War. Part of the Mariana Islands chain, it lies roughly equidistant from Tokyo, Manila, and the recently captured Marshall Islands. Its location made it strategically invaluable. For Japan, the Marianas formed part of an absolute national defense sphere, the final barrier protecting the home islands. Loss of the Marianas would sever communication lines to the South Pacific, expose Japan to direct air attack, and signal that defeat was inevitable. For the United States, Saipan represented the key to victory. The new B-29 Superfortress bomber could reach Japan from the Marianas, but not from any currently held base. Control of Saipan, along with neighboring Tinian and Guam, would establish airfields from which American strategic bombing could systematically destroy Japan's war-making capacity. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding Pacific forces, prioritized the Marianas campaign above all other operations. The island itself presented formidable defensive terrain. 15 miles long and 7 miles wide, Saipan's 72 square miles featured rugged mountains, dense vegetation, steep cliffs and caves, ideal for defense. Mount Tapachau, rising 1,554 feet near the island's center, dominated the landscape, providing observation posts and artillery positions that could cover most approaches. The Japanese had fortified the island extensively since capturing it from Germany in World War I, constructing underground facilities, artillery emplacements, and interconnected defensive positions. Japanese forces under Lieutenant General Saito included the 43rd Infantry Division, the 47th Independent Mixed Brigade, and Naval Guard forces, approximately 31,000 men total. Additionally, some 25,000 Japanese civilians lived on Saipan, working in sugar plantations and administrative roles. Their presence would add a tragic dimension to the battle's conclusion. American planners assigned the operation to Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner's Joint Expeditionary Force. The landing force, commanded by Marine Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, comprised the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions for the assault, with the 27th Infantry Division, Army, in reserve. This would be the first Pacific battle where significant Army-Marine cooperation was essential and where inter-service tensions would nearly compromise the operation. After 2 days of naval bombardment that Marines later criticized as inadequate, the assault began at 8:40 hours on June 15th. 8,000 Marines in 300 landing vehicles headed toward 4 designated beaches on Saipan's southwest coast. The initial waves hit the beaches with surprising speed, but the nightmare began almost immediately. Japanese defenders, contrary to American expectations, had survived the bombardment in considerable strength. Hidden artillery positions, previously undetected, opened fire with devastating accuracy. Mortars rained down on the beaches. Machine guns swept the landing zones from concealed bunkers. The Marines were pinned down in a killing zone barely yards from the water's edge. The 2nd Marine Division, landing on the left flank, encountered a fortified area that would become infamous as the Pocket. Here, Japanese forces had constructed interlocking defensive positions in rough terrain. Marines advancing inland immediately came under fire from multiple directions. Artillery and mortar fire devastated units attempting to move off the beaches. The 4th Marine Division, landing on the right, faced similar carnage. As follow-on waves arrived, the beaches became congested with men, equipment, and disabled vehicles. Japanese artillery observers on Mount Tapachau called down accurate fire on the packed landing zones. Casualties mounted rapidly. Landing craft and amphibious tractors burned. Medical personnel struggled to treat the wounded under continuing fire. By nightfall on D-Day, 20,000 Marines were ashore, but the beachhead was shallow and vulnerable. 8,000 Marines were crowded into an area barely 1,000 yards deep in some sectors. The Japanese had not been driven back. They had simply withdrawn to prepared positions inland. American casualties for the first day exceeded 2,000. The Marines held tenuous positions, expecting a massive Japanese counterattack during the night. That counterattack came with terrifying intensity. At 300 hours on June 16th, Japanese forces launched coordinated assaults against the beachhead. Infantry, supported by tanks, drove toward the Marine lines with orders to push the Americans back into the sea. The fighting became savage. Marines engaged Japanese tanks at point-blank range with bazookas and satchel charges. Artillery fire from offshore Navy ships broke up massed infantry attacks. Hand-to-hand combat erupted across the perimeter. The Marines held, barely. When dawn broke on June 16th, hundreds of Japanese bodies lay before the Marine positions, along with the burning hulks of destroyed tanks. The night attacks had failed, costing Japan irreplaceable men and equipment. But American casualties continued mounting. The Marines were learning what every subsequent Pacific battle would confirm. Japanese forces would fight with fanatical determination. Surrender was almost unknown, and every yard would be purchased with blood. Over the following week, American forces expanded the beachhead and began the systematic reduction of Japanese positions. The fighting developed into a brutal pattern: bombardment, assault, close combat, consolidation, repeat. Progress was measured in yards per hour rather than miles per day. Mount Tapachau became the focus of operations. This volcanic peak, honeycombed with caves and fortified positions, had to be captured before the island could be secured. Marines advancing up the mountain slopes faced a nightmare of defensive terrain. Japanese soldiers fired from caves, then disappeared into underground tunnels to emerge elsewhere. Artillery positioned on reverse slopes was immune to naval gunfire. Snipers tied themselves into trees, shooting at Americans then dying at their posts when discovered. The 27th Infantry Division came ashore on June 16-17 to reinforce the assault. The Army Division drew the difficult assignment of advancing through the island's center, terrain so rugged that even tracked vehicles struggled. Here, tensions between Marine and Army commanders created problems that nearly crippled the offensive. Lieutenant General Holland Smith, commanding the operation, was a Marine's Marine, aggressive, impatient, and contemptuous of what he considered the Army's slow pace. Major General Ralph Smith, no relation, commanding the 27th Division, led troops with different training and doctrine than the Marines. The 27th had previously fought in the Central Pacific, but had never experienced combat as intense as Saipan. On June 23, the situation came to a head. The 27th Division's advance in the center lagged behind the Marine divisions on both flanks, creating a dangerous salient. Japanese forces were infiltrating through gaps between units. Holland Smith, furious at the 27th's pace, took the extraordinary step of relieving Ralph Smith of command, replacing him with Major General Sanderford Jarman. The relief caused a firestorm of controversy. Army officers considered it an unjustified insult. Marine commanders defended Holland Smith's decision as necessary for operational success. The incident highlighted broader issues about inter-service cooperation, different tactical approaches, and the strain of sustained combat. It would reverberate through Pacific Command relationships for the remainder of the war. Meanwhile, the battle ground on. Marines attacking Purple Heart Ridge and Death Valley faced Japanese positions that seemed impregnable. Flamethrower teams crawled forward to burn out cave positions. Engineers used demolition charges to collapse tunnel entrances. Artillery and naval gunfire pounded suspected positions. Japanese defenders fought from bunkers that had to be destroyed individually, often at terrible cost to the attackers. While Marines fought for every yard on Saipan, a dramatic naval battle unfolded 200 miles to the west. The Japanese Navy, attempting to relieve Saipan, dispatched the Mobile fleet under Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, 9 carriers with 450 aircraft, 5 battleships and supporting vessels. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the U.S. Fifth Fleet, moved to intercept with 15 carriers and 950 aircraft. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought on June 1920, became known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese naval aviation, decimated in previous battles and unable to replace experienced pilots, was outmatched. American fighters, equipped with superior aircraft and directed by radar, slaughtered Japanese strike waves. By battle's end, Japan had lost 3 carriers and 600 aircraft, 3/4 of their carrier air strength. American losses were minimal. The naval battle's outcome sealed Saipan's fate. With no hope of relief or reinforcement, Japanese forces on the island were doomed. They could only fight on, making the Americans pay in blood for every position. And they did exactly that. By late June, American forces controlled most of southern and central Saipan. Japanese forces, compressed into the northern third of the island, prepared for final resistance. General Saito established his command post in caves near Marpi Point on the island's northern tip. He knew the battle was lost, but ordered his forces to exact maximum casualties before inevitable defeat. The terrain in northern Saipan favored defense. Steep cliffs, dense jungle, and innumerable caves provided defensive positions that absorbed American firepower with minimal effect. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, reinforced by the 27th Infantry Division, advanced northward in a coordinated attack. Every ridge, every ravine, every cave became a separate battle. On July 6th, American forces prepared for what they expected would be the final phase. They were wrong. What came next exceeded even the Pacific War's standard for horror. At dawn on July 7th, General Saito ordered a gyokuse, a shattering of the jewel, meaning honorable death in battle. Japanese commanders distributed sake to their troops. Officers gave final speeches. Then, in what became the largest Japanese Banzai charge of the Pacific War, between 3,000 and 4,000 soldiers and sailors, many armed only with bamboo spears or bayonets lashed to poles, charged American positions. The attack struck the 27th Infantry Division's 1st and 2nd Battalions, 105th Infantry Regiment, defending positions near Tanapag. The Japanese charged in waves, screaming, often wounded or injured soldiers hobbling forward on crutches or crawling when they could no longer walk. The ferocity was overwhelming. American lines buckled, then broke. Japanese troops overran artillery positions, killing the gun crews and destroying equipment. The fighting became hand-to-hand as positions were overrun. Some American units were annihilated. Others fell back in fighting retreat. The breakthrough threatened to split the American forces. Marine units rushed to plug the gap. Artillery fired at point-blank range, gunners loading and firing until Japanese soldiers were literally climbing over the guns. Navy ships offshore poured fire into the Japanese advance. Reinforcements arrived and counterattacked. For nearly 15 hours, the battle raged with insane intensity. When it ended, the landscape was carpeted with bodies. Approximately 4,300 Japanese soldiers lay dead. American casualties exceeded 900, with entire units effectively destroyed. It was the last major organized Japanese attack on Saipan, and it had failed. The breakthrough was contained, and American forces resumed their advance. General Saito and Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the Pearl Harbor attack commander, now trapped on Saipan, committed suicide on July 6. Japanese resistance fragmented into isolated pockets fighting to the death. As American forces closed in on the northern tip of Saipan, a tragedy unfolded that shocked even combat-hardened veterans. At Marpi Point, where 800-foot cliffs dropped into the sea, thousands of Japanese civilians gathered. Japanese propaganda had told them that Americans would torture, rape, and murder prisoners. Soldiers threatened civilians and sometimes pushed them toward the cliffs. American soldiers, advancing cautiously, called out in Japanese, offering safety. What happened next haunted witnesses for the rest of their lives. Hundreds of civilians, men, women, children, entire families, jumped from the cliffs onto the rocks below. Parents threw their children into the sea before jumping themselves. Some used grenades. Others dove from cliff faces. American soldiers watched in horror, helpless to prevent the mass suicide. Some survivors recalled hearing mothers singing lullabies to their children before jumping. Estimates suggest 1,000 or more civilians died at Marpi Point and other cliff locations. American Marines and soldiers risked their lives trying to save people, calling out reassurances, but decades of propaganda could not be overcome in moments. The tragedy represented one of war's darkest chapters, civilians so convinced of enemy brutality that death seemed preferable to capture. Some civilians did surrender. American forces established refugee camps and provided food, water, and medical care. Many surviving Japanese civilians were shocked to receive humane treatment, realizing too late that the propaganda had been lies. But thousands had already died believing those lies. Saipan was declared secure on July 9, 1944, though mopping-up operations continued for months. The butcher's bill was staggering. American forces suffered approximately 16,500 casualties, including 3,426 killed. The 2nd Marine Division lost 1,474 killed. The 4th Marine Division lost 1,156 killed. The 27th Infantry Division suffered 796 dead. Naval losses added another 300. Japanese casualties were catastrophic. Of approximately 31,000 military personnel on Saipan, only 921 survived to surrender, a 97% casualty rate. At least 22,000 were confirmed killed, with thousands more buried in caves or lost in the chaos. Civilian deaths totaled between 10,000 and 12,000, including those who committed suicide and those killed in the fighting. The strategic consequences exceeded even optimistic American projections. Within months, engineers transformed Saipan into a massive airbase. By November 1944, B-29 superfortresses began flying bombing missions against Tokyo from Saipan's Aili Field. The strategic bombing campaign that would devastate Japan's cities and industries now had its forward base. In Tokyo, the loss triggered political upheaval. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, who had led Japan into war, was forced to resign on July 18th. His government fell, replaced by the cabinet of General Kuniaki Koiso. The fall of Saipan made clear to Japan's leadership that defeat was now inevitable. Only the timing and terms remained in question. American military leadership drew important lessons. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of overwhelming firepower when properly applied. It confirmed that Japanese forces would fight virtually to the last man, making surrender or negotiation extremely unlikely. It highlighted the need for better inter-service cooperation, with the Smith versus Smith controversy prompting reforms in command relationships. The Saipan campaign also proved the value of the Central Pacific Drive strategy. Admiral Nimitz's island-hopping approach, seizing key islands while bypassing others, allowed American forces to advance steadily toward Japan while maintaining shorter supply lines than a Southwest Pacific approach. Saipan validated this strategy completely. The battle's intensity created unprecedented medical challenges. Field hospitals treated thousands of casualties under combat conditions. Doctors performed surgery in tents while mortar rounds landed nearby. Medical corpsmen became legendary for their courage, treating wounded men under fire. Many won medals for valor, and many died doing their job. The Navy's hospital ships worked around the clock. USS Solace and other vessels received casualties directly from the beaches, their operating rooms running continuously. Medical innovations developed at Saipan, including improved treatment for combat shock and more effective triage procedures, saved lives in subsequent battles. For Japanese civilians who survived, the aftermath brought trauma and displacement. American authorities established refugee camps, providing basic necessities while trying to separate military personnel from genuine civilians. The process was complicated by language barriers and mutual suspicion. Many civilians had lost entire families and faced an uncertain future. Saipan saw several tactical innovations that would influence later Pacific battles. The use of armored amphibious vehicles, LVTs, proved essential, allowing troops to cross reefs and move inland quickly. The integration of naval gunfire with ground operations improved, though Marines continued to criticize the Navy for insufficient pre-invasion bombardment. Flamethrower tactics evolved significantly. Combat engineers developed techniques for systematically clearing cave positions using flamethrowers, demolitions, and close support weapons. These methods, refined at Saipan, became standard for subsequent operations in the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The battle also demonstrated the importance of logistics and engineering. The rapid construction of airfields, port facilities, and supply depots turned Saipan from a battlefield into a forward base within weeks. Seabees, naval construction battalions, proved their worth, building infrastructure under fire and keeping supplies flowing to combat units. Communication improvements were critical. Radio coordination between units, naval gunfire support, and air support became more effective during the battle. Lessons learned about coordinating multi-division operations informed planning for future campaigns. Beyond statistics and strategy lie thousands of individual stories of courage, sacrifice, and survival. Private First Class Harold G. Agerholm, a Navy corpsman with the Marines, single-handedly evacuated 45 wounded men under heavy fire before being killed. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously. Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien, commanding the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry, organized the defense during the final Banzai charge despite being wounded multiple times. When his position was overrun, he was last seen firing a pistol at charging Japanese soldiers. Defending wounded men who couldn't evacuate, he too received the Medal of Honor. Captain Ben L. Salaman, an Army dentist serving as a regimental surgeon, found himself defending a field hospital during the Banzai attack. When Japanese troops overran his position, Saipan manned a machine gun, holding off attackers while wounded soldiers escaped. He was found dead at his gun, having been shot and bayoneted multiple times, with 98 enemy dead in front of his position. His Medal of Honor was finally awarded in 2002, nearly 60 years later. Thousands of others fought with equal courage but without recognition. Marines who held impossible positions, sailors who rescued swimmers from the water under fire, soldiers who carried wounded comrades to safety, engineers who defused mines while under enemy observation. Each contributed to eventual victory. The capture of Saipan fundamentally changed the Pacific War. With B-29 bases established in the Marianas, Japan's cities were now within range of sustained bombing. The strategic bombing campaign that followed, including the firebombing of Tokyo and other cities, stemmed directly from Saipan's conquest. The battle also demonstrated that Japan could not defend its inner defensive perimeter. If the Marianas could fall despite determined resistance, no Japanese position was safe. This realization influenced Japanese strategic thinking for the remainder of the war, leading to increasingly desperate defensive tactics and the eventual decision to use kamikaze attacks. For American forces, Saipan provided confidence that the island-hopping strategy could work even against heavily fortified positions. The techniques developed for assaulting fortified islands, concentrated bombardment, combined arms tactics, systematic reduction of defensive positions, would be refined and applied in subsequent operations. The battle's costs also influenced American planning. With casualties at Saipan exceeding 16,000 and similar or worse ratios expected for future operations, American planners began calculating the potential cost of invading Japan itself. These projections, hundreds of thousands of American casualties for an invasion of the home islands, would later influence the decision to use atomic weapons to force surrender without invasion. The Battle of Saipan stands as one of the Pacific War's pivotal engagements. In 24 days of savage combat, American forces captured an island that would become the launching point for the strategic bombing campaign against Japan. The victory came at tremendous cost, over 16,000 American casualties, and the near-total annihilation of the Japanese garrison and thousands of civilian deaths. The battle exemplified the character of the Pacific War. Japanese forces fighting with fanatical determination, suicide charges, refusal to surrender, and civilian suicides driven by propaganda. American forces responding with overwhelming firepower, technological superiority, and the willingness to accept heavy casualties to achieve strategic objectives. Saipan also revealed the tensions between services and commanders, the challenges of amphibious operations against fortified positions, and the moral complexities of war. The tragedy at Marpi Point haunted American veterans who witnessed it, forcing them to confront the human cost of propaganda and the horror of civilians choosing death over capture based on lies. The island today bears scars of the battle. Rusting tanks and artillery pieces still dot the landscape. Monuments commemorate the fallen, American, Japanese, and civilian. The cliffs at Marpi Point stand as a memorial to those who died there. Tour guides point out caves where Japanese soldiers made their last stands and beaches where Marines landed under fire. For the men who fought there, Saipan remained a defining experience. Many never spoke of what they witnessed. Others told their stories decades later, when time had slightly dulled the pain. All agreed that Saipan represented modern war at its most brutal, a campaign where victory was essential, where the cost was terrible, and where courage was commonplace because anything less meant death. The battle's legacy extends beyond military history. It demonstrated the extremes to which ideology and propaganda could drive people, the price of strategic necessity, and the courage of individuals facing impossible situations. Saipan was a victory, certainly, but one purchased at a price that forced even the victors to question the costs of war. In the broader narrative of World War II, Saipan represents the moment when Japan's defeat became not just likely but inevitable. With the Marianas in American hands, the path to Tokyo lay open. The question was no longer whether Japan would be defeated, but how much longer the war would continue and how many more would die before it ended. Saipan had answered the strategic question. The battles that followed, Guam, Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, would be fought in the shadow of that answer, each bringing the war closer to its terrible conclusion on the Japanese home islands.